So I'm going to hit record.
You sure can.
And just for the record, if you could tell us your name and the years of your service and the branch of your service.
Yes, my name is Jerry. My given name was Jerome, but I'm called Jerry with a J. Barshov, B for boy, A-R-S-H-O-V. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I have limited vision, but at the time, we came to be at war with Germany and then Japan, or Japan first, I don't remember. I felt it was my duty to volunteer, even though I could have been exempt from service. And so I did so. And I selected the engineers because I came from a family very technically involved in electrical equipment. Now, should I continue in this vein? Or did you want to get to things more germane to the service and the progression of what happened?
Well, let's go back. You said you were born in Brooklyn?
Yes.
Was there any family history of service before you went in?
No.
None whatsoever?
No. My father came from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
My mother came from Austria, and they came at young age, and there was no connection with the military service at all.
For you, it was just a sense of duty.
I'm sorry?
Just a sense of duty.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember what the process was at the time to join up?
Yes. The first thing that took place was an examination at Grand Central Station in New York City, and also a place where you would get your shots.
Mm-hmm.
And you went through all kinds of exams. They examined you, bend over, and took a look inside that way, and then they gave you injections. Some fellows, at the sight of getting an injection, just fainted away. That was not a sign of masculinity. It was just how they just had to react. And we spent one day, the only thing we were wearing was our shorts, underwear shorts, and shoes and socks. And that was the procedure at that particular location. After that, we were sent to Camp Upton, which is on Long Island, mm-hmm. and there we were going to be, let me think a moment.
Of course.
No, that's where we have an example of memory loss. I'm 91 now. I will be 92 in July. And there are certain things that do not come to me easily to remember. However, let me say that we did go to Camp Upton, and I was waiting to be assigned. And next to me was a cot. And one fellow was there, and he said, "My name is Red Buttons." I said, "That's an unusual name." Now, Red Buttons is very famous in this country as a comedian, and at the time, we didn't know who he was. And he said, "You fellas are going to go for basic training, but I've had my training. I'm an entertainer, and I'll be assigned differently." So I remember that. We had a few laughs with him. Well, so the next step was I was sent to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, just south of Washington, where I would have 17 weeks of basic training. We were taught how to use our M1 rifle, how to take it apart in the dark, clean it, and we would go on hikes, and we would be taught basic things like how to make your cot, your bed, and so forth. And we got into good shape because there was a regular regimen with regard to physical training. And we did see some films that were important. Advanced cases of venereal disease, namely syphilis. And those films were made by the U.S. Army to advise veterans that it was not a party with regard to venereal disease. We had a 25-mile hike. And I'm very, very quick to admit and confess that during the hike, I felt that it was a little bit too much, and I feigned a sprained ankle. I was picked up by a Jeep and taken back to the barracks. I cannot forget the look on the faces of my mates, my roommates, when they saw me sitting there, knowing in their heart of hearts that I should have lasted the entire 25 miles, for which I then apologized to them. And then we went along with the basic training, and at the very end, we were then going to be assigned to something else. The first sergeant called me in, and he said, "Private Barshov, you son of a bitch," like that. He says, knowing what I had done, he says, "You've been assigned to an electrical school in Manhattan, New York City." That's what I lived in Brooklyn. For I think it was 11 weeks. Now, we were stationed at the Broadway Central Hotel on Broadway corner West 4th Street. Now, the memory kicks in now because these things are very visual to me at this moment. And we would walk down Broadway in formation, and we would take a left turn on Houston Street, Houston, and walk over to 3rd Avenue, which at that time had an elevated line, which was later torn down. We got on that train to I think, 66th Street to an electrical school. Now, why was I selected to go to electrical school? Because when I gave them information on my background, I told them my dad was selling electrical equipment or electrical contracting, and I often served as a helper. And so I went off to that school, and it was very, very nice being in New York City. I would wander around when I had time off. And an interesting thing, on 2nd Avenue, there was a restaurant called Moskowitz and Lupowitz. They served Romanian food, and I had to go to the bathroom, so I walked into the restaurant, and who do I see sitting there? My mother and father. I said, "Mom, what are you doing there?" "We're having a good meal. Join us." That was a very, very interesting moment. After the basic training, there was that school, and after the school, I was then waiting to be assigned to go elsewhere. And that particular group we were called the Repel Depot, Replacement Depot. And in my particular case, I was then told I was going to go off to Europe. They wouldn't tell us where. I got on, I think it was the Queen Elizabeth or one of these large ships, and it took me, am I saying too much right now?
No. I have a question, though, to ask.
Please.
You, which was, what year did you join?
1943.
1943.
And I got out in 1946.
Okay.
I would say I served about 2.5 to 2 3/4 years.
Okay. So at this time, this was in the lead up to the Normandy invasions, right?
Well, yeah.
Oops, oopsie. That's okay. You got it? Clearly.
Well, I'll bring you up to date on that.
Yeah.
We landed in England, in Liverpool,
Mm-hmm.
a very dismal city, as I remember. And we got on a train to a place called Bristol. And there we slept overnight for a couple of nights in a school gymnasium. And after that, we then voyaged down to an area next to Bath and Frome and Warminster. These are names that pop out of my head. And there we bivouacked out in the field. And we stayed there for about a week or so, 2 weeks. We would be permitted a pass to get out and visit the town. And I'll never forget the Brits, as I would call them, lined up, 20 people waiting in line just for a couple of pieces of fish and chips. And I would say they were quite an impressive group of people. And I have a high regard for the English as far as what they put up with. Well, I was sleeping in my tent, and I heard a roar overhead at around 3 o'clock in the morning. I got out and I looked and I saw a plane. And hour after hour after hour, the planes kept coming. And that was the invasion. We then were given notice that we were going to go to Normandy. And they didn't say where, but we landed at Omaha Beach. We took one of these special ships they had to transport many military people. And we had all of our belongings, backpacks, rifles, so forth. We got to Normandy on D-Day, which was the 6th, plus 6 days. By that time, the beaches were cleaned up. Before that, the beaches, right after D-Day, were littered with dead and injured soldiers. And so we were spared all of that by landing at D-Day plus 6. And it was there that I contracted a bit of diarrhea. So I was sent to a field hospital, and to my amazement, 3 cuts away from where I was were German prisoners of war, getting the same treatment with the same nurses that we were getting. That was quite an eye-opener. And they seemed to be quite obnoxious in their conduct because I could understand German. And we then proceeded. Now, this I can give you the course of my military career.
Could I ask what the Germans were saying?
Well, they were laughing between them, probably laughing. They didn't say any specific words that I could follow, but they were laughing that how these Americans treating us this way, you would never expect to get that treatment if you were an American prisoner of war in Germany.
Yeah.
So after that, we got back on the road going toward Germany. And we landed in a village, I would say about 10 miles south of Paris. And it was called Lardy, Lardi. And we were stationed there, waiting for advice to move forward. Everything had to be programmed by the higher-ups. And I befriended a family. I speak French, I would say at this point, fluently. At that time, I spoke French rather well. And I was a bit of a, what's the word? A demonstrator? No, I was a bit of a built-in entertainer. And I sang, when I met this family, Piver, P-I-V-E-R, husband and wife and 2 sons. Sons were 15 and 17. I was 19. So I sang to them, Allons enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé, French national anthem. I sang it right through. They were very impressed. And the fact that I spoke French was the eye-opener, was the last, they couldn't get over that. And I met with them many times and would have dinner with them. And their dinner practically every night consisted of a soup made with haricots verts, which is string beans, et des pommes de terre, which are potatoes, no meat. Nothing else. That was the soup. And they had some bread. So one evening I was eating with them, and the bread looked like it was disappearing. I said, Monsieur Piver, why? And I said it in French, why don't you go out and get another loaf of bread? Nous pouvons pas. We are unable to do that. We have a ration. I said, well, let me see what I can do. So I go to the boulangerie. That's baker in French. And I said, Monsieur, and I spoke to him in French, of course, I would like to buy a loaf of bread. He says, buy? Here it is. He gave me 2 loaves of bread. When I brought it back to the Pivers, they were astounded. But this is the way military was treated after all, we were liberators, liberating Americans. And of course, I can't remember each and every day, but I know that we were on our way toward Germany, and we got to an area called Alsace-Lorraine, which over the years belonged to Germany and then France, and that, of course, it was Germany, but was liberated when we liberated France. And I went to my superior officer and said, I need to have my glasses checked. They're just not right. I said, well, where would I go? We have a hospital for that, if you'll have it, but you'll have to hitchhike to get there. We have no means of driving you there. We're too involved elsewhere. So I hitchhiked. A Jeep stops, and there are two guys sitting up front and one guy in the back. The Jeep holds 4 people. So it stops, and they invite me to get on. I hand my rifle to the guy in the back, and then I pull myself in and sit down. He gives my rifle back to me. Boom! It goes off. Now, he must have released the safety that was on the rifle. And I felt nothing, but I looked down and there was a hole in my shoe. Now, the bullet ricocheted like 1,000 times. There were pellets. Those pellets were all throughout my entire 2 legs. So I was immediately taken to a hospital. And I was pretty much put on an assembly line. The way it worked, the surgeon had no time for x-rays or stories. Next, as soon as the guy came before him, he made a decision right then and there what had to be done. Next to me was a man seriously wounded because the medic, when he heard what happened to me, he cut open the boot and wanted to put some powder. I said, don't worry about me. Please take care of this guy and this guy. Mine is minor. In any event, when I got before the surgeon, they gave me anesthesia, and they surgically removed all of the pellets in both legs. There was surface near the skin. The only thing they did not remove, which was not practical, was one of the pieces of the bullet was embedded in my right toe, in the bone. Now, you don't about get something out of a bone. It's already embedded in there. It has not bothered me, but I'm 20% disabled because of that. I get a check from Uncle Sam, about $230 a month. Had I saved it from the very beginning, I could have bought a Mercedes. Well, anyway, after they put me in a cast and I had anesthetic, and when I woke up, I was sent to recover in a ward that they had, and I would get a wheelchair, and my legs were in a cast, my right leg anyway, and I would visit other veterans and gab with them because there were some that were seriously injured. I remember one fellow, his stomach was like practically destroyed. A sad situation. I remember that. And so while I was there, I said to myself, Jerry, don't try to be a hero. You have 2400 vision, which is limited vision. Go to your officer, which I did. I said, sir, is there any chance of being reassigned to a unit behind the lines, non-combat location? He said, why? And I explained to him. He says, yes, I think we can arrange that. So I was then assigned to the Signal Corps, which, of course, is a behind-the-lines group. And at that time, coincidentally, the hospital was in Dijon, France. Mm-hmm. And again, I spoke French with the nurses and everyone else, and my French became better and better. And so I said, well, where will I be going? You'll be going to a small village called Wandre, W-A-N-D-R-E, which is about 7 miles south of Liège, which is a major city in Belgium, French-speaking. And so we were put up in, as I remember, inside a school where we had facilities and food given to us. And I don't remember the exact mechanics of it, but and my job was to actually translate, where necessary, to workers in a factory that were repairing Signal Corps equipment that came back for repair. And then on payday, I would stand there with my rifle, and just as a symbol, it wasn't needed, but I was there just as a symbol while they were being paid. And I'm giving you a lot of trivia as I remember it. Okay, it's all right with you. So anyway,
Yeah.
I got tired of walking from Wandsworth to Liège. I figured there must be a better way to get there. I didn't have any vehicle available to me. I said, gee, a bicycle would be wonderful. So I approached one of the workmen, and he said, well, sure, you can have a bicycle. We'll give you one. But il n'y a pas de pneus. He said, but there are no tires. I said, well, tell me, where do you get them? He said, you can't buy any tires. Everything is rationed. He would say it in French. I said, is there a factory that makes tires? Yes, Michelin. And he gave me the address. And it wasn't very far from where we were. So I walked in, I introduced myself. Je suis un soldat américain, comme vous voyez. I'm an American soldier, as you see. And I have need of 2 tires. I'd be very happy to pay whatever the price. He says, you're not paying anything. And he gave me 2 tires. I now had 2 tires on a bicycle, and the men in the shop built a wooden box they put on the back of the bicycle, and they painted it black. And in white, they outlined in white, Jerry on each side of the box. I didn't give it much thought, but then as I was cruising around Liège, I would be stopped. Qu'est-ce que vous avez? What do you have? I said, what do you mean? They were looking for cigarettes or candy, and they thought I was doing black market because the box was painted black. And so, yes, okay. The next sequence is interesting. I found myself in Liège one day, and all of a sudden I saw swarms of people running around, hugging and kissing. It was VE Day. War had ended with Germany. Oh, and people were elated. Well, I can understand why. They had been occupied by the Germans, French, and the Belgian, and the Dutch. And so I was waiting to see what would happen next. I was escorted into a theater, and at that time, General Marshall had made a film. And he said, men, the war with Germany is over. Many of you are going home, but please remember, we're still at war with Japan. And so I was then selected not to go home, but to continue on to my next theater. And I was put on a train, and it stopped in Paris. And I don't know how I contacted Pugh family. I don't know if I had used a telephone. I must have. They came down. They were in tears because we were very close. They came down. They were in tears, and I told them I was going to go, not exactly know where, but I know I was going on a train south. And they took me to a city called Dijon. No, not Dijon, sorry. That was where I was in this hospital. We stopped for a day or 2 in a place called Avignon. And I remember, incidentally, this I'm about to tell you, I put into a memoir, which when I was interviewed by the Proctor student, and I didn't know that it was being recorded or anything like that, but apparently it's very simple to have a recorder, because this individual asked me a lot of questions, and I blurted out what came out of me that I remembered, and it ended up in this particular article, very graphic. I told them that I was sitting at a cafe and minding my own business, and a lovely young lady comes and sits down, and we start talking to each other, and we've become very friendly. I won't go into great details, but you can understand what I'm about to say. And I said, I had all of the human feelings within me that are normal. We ended up at a hotel, and we were intimate with each other. And then, now remember, she is French. And I was not prepared. I did not have any preventative items with me. But I had seen these films on the advanced stages of syphilis, and that lingered in my head. And what I did, as soon as I was finished, I immediately got dressed in a hurry. And she was looking at me because certainly French people do not consider lovemaking that way. And I got dressed quickly and I ran to what is called a pro station. This was a setup that the Army provided, knowing that servicemen were being intimate, were having intercourse. And when you came to this pro station, you walked in, there were signs exactly telling you what to do. And without going into details, which I told this guy, I went in there and I was very much at ease, knowing that I had done what I was supposed to do. When I went back to the hotel room, I said, "Can I see you next week?" And she said, "Yes." So I showed up because we were there about a month. And I went there a week later. She did not show up. She probably thought I was a loser. And I was, from that angle. Then we continued on by train to Marseille. And we get on a small freighter. That freighter was manned by U.S. Navy, Marines, who were supposed to take care of security. Not that there was any security needed, but that was their job. And then, of course, personnel other than Navy that ran the ship. It was a small freighter. And we were given hammocks with a little place to put belongings, and that was our home. We left Marseille and proceeded toward the Panama Canal. Now that in itself was a long trip with a slow boat. When we got to the entrance of the Panama Canal, we were taken off. The U.S. Army had some feelings. They took us off the ship and by train took us to a beach, and where we had a big meal indoors, and we were at a beach and we fraternized with nurses and had a great time. And then after that was over, we went back on a train taken to the other side of the canal. So we never traversed the canal actually in a ship. But we went from Atlantic to the Pacific. Now, about 3 days out of Panama, the conventional way an announcement is made on board a ship by the Navy. Today, same thing. Now hear this. Now hear this. A bomb the size of a baseball was just dropped on Hiroshima. Of course, it wasn't the size of a baseball. Little Boy, I think it was called, was much, much larger. And right away, everyone thought, well, the war is over. Of course, it took another bomb at Nagasaki to get the Japanese to capitulate. But our ship kept going, and we went and landed at Manila in the Philippines. The entire trip took 40 days. Now, while out of Panama a day or two, I was given guard duty, which I laughed. Guard duty in a hatchway between the enlisted men and the officers. What were they concerned about? So I thought it was, in our words, a crock. Mm-hmm. But that was the job given me. So I take my rifle with me, and I have a guard duty from, I think it was from 6 to 12. And I'm standing there, and around 11 o'clock, I say, this is ridiculous. And I'm sleepy. I'm going to sit down and take a nap. I sit down and take a nap. And next thing I know is a Marine is kicking my foot. "Soldier, get up. You're sleeping on duty. You're sleeping on guard." I said, "Oh, come on, fella. I didn't mean anything by that. I'm sorry. I'll get up right now and finish my tour of duty." He says, "I don't want to hear any excuses. I'm pulling you in. I'm taking you to the brig." And he takes me to a small jail that they had on this ship and puts me in that little jail. I'm still not in any way fazed by this. I just sing to myself, and I'm happy-go-lucky, and so, after a while, what is it they're going to do, hang me? So the guard the guard outside the jail is also Marine, and he hears me humming, and he says, you can't sing or lie down until your guard duty is up. I said, okay. Next morning at 7 o'clock, after breakfast, I'm taken to a room, and I walk in, and there is sitting a captain and 2 lieutenants, one on each side. And the captain says, Private Barshov, how do you plead to these charges? I said, sir, guilty as hell. I have to apologize. It was stupid of me. And he in turn said, well, just a moment. He confers with the 2 lieutenants. He said, Barshov, we're going to demote you from private first class to private. And we're going to confine you to the company area for 15 more days. This will not be on your discharge. That was called a summary court-martial. I was shaking in my boots. I went into that. I didn't know what to expect. And so we then landed in the Philippine Islands. That was in 1945. Being so adept at languages, it didn't take me long to pick up Tagalog, the language of the Philippines. And I knew by that time, if you're looking to be assigned a duty, what's the greatest one to have? Be a truck driver. You would always have a vehicle available to you for your own private use. I was given that job. I requested it, and I was given the responsibility of making sure it was gassed up and taking officers to various places and driving a truck with workers that we had Filipino workers that were doing things for the U.S. Army, and that worked out beautifully. It was like a vacation. It was hot and humid in Manila, the Philippines. And I made a lot of friends with Chinese and Filipinos, and they enjoyed my speaking Tagalog. I even went to an evening called the Sabong, where they have cockfights. Mm-hmm. And I noticed how they would say, Sapula, Sapute, the white one or the red one, on whatever, maybe it was a ribbon or something. Or they would say, Sawala Samerum, which means nothing or with, and that's for a little hat that they would put on top of it. And then there would be a cockfight. And the way they would bet with their hand signals, Walawanim, Logis, they knew what they were doing. It was all over my head, but that was a nice experience. And then I took a drive up to a city called Baguio, which was about 30 miles from Manila. Manila was hot and humid. Baguio was delightful. It was temperate. They grew tomatoes there. You couldn't grow tomatoes in this hot climate. They had all of the vegetables that would grow in a temperate climate. They were growing there, and they would export it down to Manila. I then said to myself, I bet you they're interested in getting bananas, which are grown in the Philippines, but it has to be transported from wherever they're grown into Manila. So I went ahead and contacted another tribe of Filipinos called the Igorot. They're all very small people, like pygmies. And I bought bananas from them. I had U.S. currency. That was fine. And I brought it down to Manila, and I sold the bananas at a very low price just to help the Filipinos. And I had a lot of interesting experiences there, and then I was then told that I would get out of the Army on points. You had a certain number of points based on where you served, what you did, etc. And I don't remember accurately just how I got back home, but it had to be, this is where my memory has lost me. I had to, I would say, get on a ship, which probably took me to San Francisco. And there I was probably put on a train to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I was discharged and given my mustering out pay. Mm-hmm. My mother and dad visited me there in Fort Dix and took me home, and that was the end of my Army career. Now, I went to the VA because I was told that if you were a veteran, you could go to the college of your choice. I could have gone to Harvard or Yale or Princeton. I went to my dad. I said, Dad, I think I would like to get a college education because I never went past high school. And I did have 1 year, I left it out before I volunteered. When I hit 18, I graduated high school. Rather than volunteer at that time, I went to a school called Defense Training Institute, where the government provided 10 months of very intensive education in the engineering category. And I graduated that, and I have a diploma. So anyway, my dad said, no, you're not going to college. This is a family business, and we need you here. So I said, Dad, look, out of respect to you, that's what I'll do. And of course, I started working at our company, our family business, which was started in 1915. And last year, we celebrated 100 years as a family business. We had a big reunion up there in New York, in Brooklyn.
What's the company called?
The company was started as B&B Electric Company, B&B Electrical Contractors. And then my brothers and I had two brothers. We decided that electrical contracting was for the birds, and we wanted to buy and sell equipment. Buy an electric motor for $5 or $20 and sell it for $30 or whatever. So we changed the name from B&B Electrical Contractors to B&B Electric Company, Incorporated. Now, we advertised in the Yellow Pages. There was another guy doing the very same thing, our competitor. But because our name was B&B Electric, we came before him because he was named B&B Motor and Control. I called him. I said, Paul, his name, I remember that. I don't think it's right for us to really be before you and get your phone. We've been getting your phone calls. We tell them, but still we've been getting them. So I changed the name. I took the B&B Electric and changed it to Babco Incorporated. Awesome. B&B.
Yeah.
And it's there. I remained for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And I then became the sole owner because I lost my two brothers. And it was very interesting being in that business. And today, my son runs that business.
Wow.
He wasn't given the business because he had 3 siblings. And so the only fair way was for him to buy it at a good price. Pretty much, then of course I got married in 1950 and I went off on my honeymoon. Where? But to Europe. To France, Holland, Netherlands. And we even went into Germany, to Frankfurt, southern Germany, Bavaria, Italy, Switzerland, Italy, 1 month. In those days, people taking a honeymoon did not have 1 month. They usually go away for a long weekend or to Bermuda or something like that. So without going into personal life and my family and who was born and what my wife's name was and so forth, that essentially is my life. Now, a couple of things happened recently that are linked in a sense to what we're doing here now. One was the interview with the Proctor student that asked me many of the same questions and was very good at it. And I gave many of the same answers and I'm giving you now. And they were kind enough to make a transcript of what occurred, of what I had said, and gave me many copies so I could give them to my grandchildren and my children. Lo and behold, in December of 2015, or maybe November, I'm contacted by the French consulate in Miami. The consul general sends me a letter. The consul general is a person in charge of the consulate. I'm sent a letter advising me that I've been nominated to receive the Légion d'honneur, which is the French equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, I didn't save anyone from a flaming building. Why did they select me? I can't get a straight answer from them, but I believe it's a combination of things. The fact that I was in France, the fact that I spoke French, the fact that I was wounded in France, and I stayed in a hospital in France, and my honeymoon, where you hand in a passport, was 1 month, much of it in France. That may have been sort of the contributory reasons. And so on December the 10th, 2015, at St. Augustine Beach, we all get there for the ceremony. And there are 8 others beside me, 8 other veterans. I looked at them, they look older than I was. Anyway, one funny thing is we showed up at St. Augustine at the prescribed time, and we went to City Hall, but we forgot that it was St. Augustine Beach, and that was another location across a big bridge. Anyway, we're there, and each one of us is called up to the podium, and the consul general is giving a bit of a speech, not his words. He's speaking the words of the president of France. It's very meaningful. And congratulates me, and they pin the medal on me, and then he extends his hand to shake, and I push it away. Now, of course, everyone except you was aghast by this when I tell the story. But then I went ahead and kissed him on both cheeks, which is the way French people greet man or woman. So that got a big laugh. Mm-hmm. And then I proceeded to listen to the other fellas being interviewed, and then he's about to call the entire ceremony to an end. They had food prepared. I raised my hand because I was in the front row. He says, oui, monsieur? Well, yes, sir. I said, I have a few words to say. So he couldn't refuse me. He said, well, certainement, certainly. So I get up to the microphone. I said, bonjour, mes amis. Hello, my friends. Je vais parler en français. I'm going to speak in French, mais je le traduire, but I'm going to translate. De temps en temps, from time to time, ils me demandent, they ask me, Jerry, comment vous parlez le français si bien? Jerry, how come you speak French so well? Et toujours je réponds la même chose, and I always answer the same way. Si vous voulez apprendre la langue française, il faut sortir avec une Française. If you want to learn how to speak French, you've got to go out with a French woman. Je l'ai fait. I did it. Plusieurs de fois, many times. That got a big rise. And that's where we are right now. I can answer any questions you might have.
Wow, so many. Sorry, I was messing with that over there. I'm sorry. So many.
I'll say this, though. I have a standard cliche, and that is, I sighed when I saw a man who had no shoes, and then I cried when I saw a man who had no feet. And this is the attitude that I have today. I'm blessed to be here talking to you at age 91 when there are so many that are less fortunate. And another experience I had just the other day, I wear a hat that I do have in my car. Mm-hmm. It says World War II veteran. So I'm at the Outback restaurant here in town, and I'm on my way to the bathroom, and the guy says, thank you for your service. He shakes my hand. This time I took his hand. And he chatted with me, asking me a few questions. I went to the bathroom, came back. As I passed him back, he said he wanted to know a few more bits, And then I sat down. And then a waiter comes over and says, a gentleman dining at our restaurant is just giving you a $20 gift card toward your meal. He passed me by on his way out. I said, you didn't have to do that. He says, I wish I could have done more. This was some of the feeling that people have regarding World War II veterans. It's really very gratifying. I wasn't looking for a handout, but it's something I'm very proud of, being a World War II veteran. And I'm blessed to be here to be talking to you, actually.
Yeah.
I have no afflictions, some minor things, which I think I can get corrected.
Do you... Oh, there's so many questions. Did you ever get back in contact with the Pugh family?
With yes. Yeah, in fact, I've left that out. I befriended family. I became good friends with a family in Wandra, which is the one that is south of Liège.
Mm-hmm.
In town, the woman was going out with my sergeant, and her father was the barber, and I had my hair cut by him, and we became very close. And when I went to France and Belgium on my honeymoon, we visited with them. Naomi, I remember, she's passed away, but we had some very good times together, she and her husband. And then I took I have 4 children, my 2 elder children. I took them with us on a visit to Europe, and we visited the same family. And then on our honeymoon, I visited the Pugh family. He was involved in removing artifacts because he did demolition on buildings, and he took whatever he thought was of value. And we met with him, and of course the boys were grown, and we wanted to have a night out, so he took us, instead of to the Folies Bergère, he took us to Lido, which is one of these nightclubs with entertainment. And my son, I think at that time he was 16. So part of the entertainment, the women came out bare-breasted. He freaked out. and then Robert was the son of Mr. Pugh, and he's the one we went there with. And the waiter brought the bill and put it on the table. And Robert pushed the bill toward me. And then I took it and pushed it to him. And again, this went up and back a couple of times. But the last time, he let it stay. He pushed it back to me, so I ended up paying. I didn't object to that. And that's about the size of it, yeah. I mean, there are other tidbits that would come to my mind, but I've spit out enough.
There's so much. I wanted to ask you about when you were in Europe and then when you went to the Pacific, how much contact, how many letters were you receiving to and from home? Was contact with home difficult or easy?
I would send, we had a regular V-mail, whatever it was called. I would send letters home telling them I was okay. I told them about what happened with the gunshot wound, but there were not that many letters. There were a few.
Yeah. I
was pretty much wound up, occupied with being in the Army and being there in Europe.
Yeah. When you initially got out of the Army, was there a period of adjustment?
Not for me.
Not for you?
No. I went right into work. I started working. I worked as a helper, doing electrical contracting, and I found my place in life in that particular business.
Yeah.
And of course, over the years, I speak French whenever I can. And I also get a lot of laughs from Filipinos. They never expect anyone like myself to be able to say anything in Tagalog. And I remember it to this day. And because of that, and because after all French is a Romance language, I do quite well with Spanish. as well as Italian.
Mm-hmm.
They're linked together.
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, we have right now, my second wife requires a caretaker. And she's a woman who comes several mornings a week. She's from Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always speaking to her in Spanish. But I have a standard routine when it comes to other Hispanics. For example, I said, I detect an accent. Donde usted? Where are you from? He says, Mexico. Oh, Mexico. Yo gusto mucho mexicanos. I like Mexicans very much. Pero yo prefiero las mexicanas, but I prefer Mexican women. I do that with either Mexico or Ecuador or Peru or whatever.
Works every time.
Yes.
This is a different kind of question, but one of the things that we often find when we talk to veterans of subsequent wars. So the Second World War, it was a just war, and everybody understood that it was a just war, and there was a general national consensus that it was a just war. I think that's part of the reason that World War II veterans are appreciated the way that they are.
I think Vietnamese veterans got a raw deal, because when they came home, there was a lot of controversy as to whether it was necessary for them to be there, but it really wasn't their doing.
Yeah.
But they got a bad deal there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the same is true in the mines. That's changed the relationships that veterans have with civilians, that war. Because there's a lot of distrust, I think, between Vietnam veterans and civilians, and now subsequently too.
There was a great deal of love given to veterans. And I remember before I was inducted, it was kind of foolish of me to do this, but I was very curious. My friend he was in the Merchant Marine, and he was my size. I put on his uniform, and we both went up to the Catskills. Mm-hmm. We called it the Jewish Catskills, because many of them were ethnically, you didn't have to be Jewish to go to the hotel, but it was ethnically Jewish. And the conventional way would be to go to the hotel, you would always be seated at a table for 8. Mm-hmm. And here I walk in with my friend, and we have on a uniform, we were treated like royalty. And we were escorted to a table for 8, and there were some young ladies there, and it was a very, very memorable experience, yes.
Yeah. So that's that kind of nationalist, that kind of national, what's the word, unity around the military effort clearly did a lot of good for you coming home.
Look, today we have the same sort of thing between veterans. In fact, I've left out something that is current. I was asked to join a group called Normandy Veterans. Mm-hmm. No, in fact, they call themselves D-Day Veterans. So I asked Brian, who was the guy that organized the group, well, I didn't land on D-Day. He says, look, you landed on Omaha Beach. It may not have been D-Day, but you belong. You're a World War II veteran. You were at Omaha Beach. You belong to our group. So we meet once a month at the Conestoga restaurant in Alachua. And we discuss various things about the war. Some of the members were very active in the Air Force. One or two of them are close to 100 years old. Mm. And there is a bit of love exchange between the fellows there, appreciating what one did versus the other. And that's something that I do every month, whenever I can fit it in.
Yeah. That sense of community is very important, I think, to all veterans. That sense of, we may not have done the same things, but we were there. Yeah. I
can say one thing, the Veterans Administration has been very good to veterans. I have a request in now for a scooter because I cannot walk an extended distance. I have trouble with both my knees. And after a block or two, I tire. Mm. And I'm going in for an interview to see if I would be permitted to have one. They'll ask me certain questions, examine me, and go over whatever details they have. And then in the course of everyday living, I meet other veterans and we talk together about it. One might be a Marine, and I tell them about my experience with that Marine. And others would have been the Air Force and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any questions?
You don't have to have any questions. It's not mandated.
No, I was very interested in your journey and how you had so much freedom over
Where?
in Europe. You know, when you were
During the war or after the war?
during.
Well, I did not have that much freedom. After all, I was on the move toward Germany when I got wounded.
Right.
In Alsace-Lorraine. Saarburg was the name of the town.
Mm.
So it was then I was transported to Wandra, which is a small village, and that was where I was stationed. And that was south of Liège. And then the rest, of course, I've told you where I was then. After the war with Europe was over, I was told I'd have to be relocated in the Pacific, in the Philippines. Now, why would they send me to the Philippines? Well, when the boat left, it was still at war with Japan.
Yeah.
It was after leaving the Panama Canal, about 3-4 days later, or after Nagasaki, that we were then told that the war was over with Japan. So that pretty much is the history.
Yeah.
I'll say this. I cherish my experience as a veteran, as a soldier in the U.S. Army. I went in as a boy. I came out as a man. And I would say, not that it was a vacation, but I was blessed because there was nothing seriously happening to me other than that experience with the bullet wound.
When you were, where did you say you were stationed when you heard the airplanes going? That was at Bath?
When the planes were flying toward D-Day,
D-Day.
I was outside of Frome, outside of Bath.
Bath, okay.
In a field.
In the field. This is a question that I had because it just occurred to me now that you went over D-Day +6, and so was there any reports coming back to you about what had happened on Omaha Beach?
We knew very little.
Yeah.
We knew very little. We had a newspaper called the Stars and Stripes.
Uh-huh.
So there were some bits in there, but we were really, for example, we were not aware of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
The only memory I have of that was something visual. When I was stationed in Belgium, and I was in Liège, a train stopped in Liège, and the inmates got out to take a breath of fresh air. To this day, I can never forget seeing a human being with just bone and skin, not any fat at all, like a living skeleton. And many of them that way. It was horrible to see.
Yeah.
And many of them ate too much when given, and as a result, they might have perished.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I heard a story about a few guys that survived the concentration camp, and they were given, I think, $30 and told to make their way back. And they bought meat from somebody, and 2 of them died of dysentery 3 days later because their bodies couldn't process anything. It's one of those heartbreaking stories I've heard. Yeah.
The other thing I remember is when I was on my honeymoon, and I knew that there were displaced people waiting to come back, going to go somewhere, and it was in Germany, in Bavaria. And I took along things like soap and various other items, and I see a Jewish man walking along with a beard and with a yarmulke. And I said, and he was walking, and I said, "Mein Mann," which is not Yiddish, that's German. He was petrified because of what he had gone through. So I ran after him and said, "Ich bin a Yid. I am Jewish," which incidentally, I am ethnically Jewish. I'm not talking about religion now. And we then became very friendly, and then people flocked to me, and we had good things to give them. It was a wonderful experience.
Could you still see when you were in Europe for your honeymoon? You said 1950?
Yeah, that was when my honeymoon, we left September of 1950.
Could you still see the scars of the war all over Europe?
Oh, yes. When we came into Frankfurt,
Uh-huh.
not one building was standing.
Oh, wow.
It was flattened. We had to look for a place to stay. We ended up staying in what is called a Gasthaus. A woman took her home and made it into a little bed and breakfast. She was not a happy camper. Why? She's a mother. She lost one son on the Russian front and one son on the Western front. And that was our first experience with Germans.
Yeah.
That many of them had suffered as well. We can't go into the rest of it. Visiting, another curious thing, we're standing in a town called, give me 30 seconds.
You can have.
This is what is indigenous to getting over 90. Something you would remember, but you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Rothenburg is the name of the town. It was spared bombing by our people because it was a historic city.
Mm-hmm.
So we went back to visit. And one of the events, if you call it an event, experiences, there would be in the square a huge clock. On the hour, little men would come out with each one holding a stein and take a drink of beer, or simulate it. So I'm there watching, and there's a kid right next to me. And I said, and I didn't have a watch. Why, I don't know. I said to this kid, "Wie viele Säge is this? What time is it?" In Yiddish. So my wife nudges me. She said, she took German in school. She says, "No, it's not wie viel. It's wie viel Uhr ist this?" That's the correct way in German. Then he understood.
You said earlier that you joined the army as a boy and you came out as a man. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, how you were different when you came home?
Now, repeat that. You say that I came out.
You said earlier that you joined the military as a boy.
Yes.
And when you came out, you were a man. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on how you were different a little bit.
Well, let me put it this way. As a youngster growing up, I was not sophisticated. Not that you have to become sophisticated with regard to losing your virginity, but it is in the Army that I lost my virginity. I was not sophisticated along those lines. Not that one has to be. There's no prerequisite that one has to be a sex predator. But I was very much immature. That was only one facet. I was very, very immature, and I really grew up while I was in the Army during that space of time.
Yeah.
I came to appreciate what other people thought. I had a great amount of interchange with other kinds of men like myself.
Yeah. Do you have any questions? No? Sir, I cannot thank you enough, Jerry.
It's all right. It was my pleasure. I love telling these stories.
I learned so much. Thank you. I'm going to quit recording now.